Hello everyone. So it's demo day. We've got a bunch coming in today, but we're starting off with this little study on some hair approach, some hair techniques. So we went over it sort of in class with the braid, but working at a smaller scale, of course, changes things. So I've got an initial sketch. I'm using a small brush and working on putting in some shadow and some texture. I'm using a deep Payne's gray navy blue, and allowing it to sort of sculpt some of the locks of the hair and the movement of the hair. I'm not trying to get every single little texture on this because of the scale we're working at, but I am definitely trying to separate out some pieces to show some light. So this is a little bit like underpainting. The coolness will also help us get our shadows darker, since for hair I always like to work in thin layers to get a lot of different variations and colors in there. Without having to mix as many colors, I work in thinner layers. As they overlap, they kind of stack and create more colors, more variation in tone, more variation in value. So that's why I choose to use that technique for this. So we've got our shadows sort of just initially blocked in, really quickly drawn in the face and everything here. And the next thing I'm going to do is just start using a little bit of a transparent golden ochre to warm up a couple of our more highlight areas, the areas where the light's bouncing. So if you look here, this reference image has sort of a shadow that goes down center. It has a primary light on the right side and a bit of a bounced light on the back that creates a bit of a rim light. So I'm using my warmth, my underpainting of my warmth, to help really show where that light is hitting, how the hair becomes more golden as it moves towards that light. So as it falls over her left shoulder, it actually is more exposed, more leaning towards almost a blonde or a gold on that corner, and the other side's going to be more darker, truer to her local color. And whenever we think about hair, we have to think about all those undertones, about how the transparency of the actual hair itself is why we see high shine. It's why we see these different colors. So we take that into consideration as we're painting it and try to vary our undertones the same way we do when we're painting wood grain or anything else where there's some unpredictable colors. So I'm using a little bit of, it's like a warm brown, kind of a sienna, but it's got a bit of a pinkish tone to it actually, mixed in with quite a bit of gloss medium. So I'll dry it here in a second, but it's very transparent. You can see where I kind of swatched it on the right hand side. And I'm using that to glaze over pretty much everything. I'm going to leave my brightest highlights, and I'm using a larger brush for this just because it gets me a little less choppy in the glaze section. But realize that especially when working with hair, in the smaller brush or the larger brush, we're going to keep our hand moving, our brush moving in the direction of the hair and still creating some texture within that. So that where you do get those peaks and valleys from your brush strokes and your glaze, and it gets really dark in those areas, is going to be helpful to us instead of hindering us. If we were painting across this, it would be very weird, right? So I'm going to go ahead and let this gloss layer dry, and we will come there it is. So it has some nice warmth to it now. I added a little bit of some skin colors just to help us see the transition from skin to hair. I think it needs to be quite a bit darker to match our research image. So I'm going back in with that deep grayish navy and bumping up some of our shadows. I'm working drier, so I'm using a small brush and a little bit of a drier point, which is going to release more texture into our world and give us kind of feathered edges. So it's less like brush strokes and more like little tiny individual shadows and hairs now. So as we really focus on finding the balance in these areas, I'm always wanting to remember that cool tones, which is why I've chosen this blue for my shadow, help things recede, and warm tones help things come forward. So I'm also making sure to bump those shadows behind the ear, behind where the half updo layers over the hair that's underneath, the other side of the neck. So it's also helping us have more shape, more dimensionality. And we're making sure to add a little bit of that shadow, individual little feathered strokes where the part kind of separates over the top. Sorry, my dogs always choose this exact moment to have a little fun. I'm now got a very dry point and a bit of white that I'm using to do just a couple of our highlights. They're gonna seem really, really bright and kind of huge by comparison to the scale of the face, the scale of the hair. because we're using pure white and a paintbrush, and acrylics, you get that really kind of thick edge sometimes. But we're going to have the ability to glaze over them and to soften the effect. So think of them as just another layer in the color, and you're gonna have the ability to kind of soften that to kind of blend it in just a minute. But first we're gonna use it to separate out some areas to help us build that through dimensionality as the hair wraps around the head, as the hair wraps around the back of the head and goes into the updo, and to show that sort of rim light across the back. Now, I've done this painting is at twice the speed I did it, I believe. So what you are seeing is very truthful to like how fast I did it. I think I probably spent 15 minutes total painting this. So you could obviously like do a little bit more finessing, a tiny amount of detail if you wanted to, but it doesn't, for especially how we work, doesn't really need to always be that much more work for your renderings. So I want to make a cool glaze of a brown now, also knowing that's going to layer cool on cool in those shadows and create like nice deep shadows. You can see as it's going over everything, I'm avoiding my highlights again and using this to deepen and cool down my shadow areas where that red glaze kind of gave us too much warmth and threw things lighter. But where they go on top of each other, you still get a nice richness in the colors and the tones. It doesn't feel so flat as if I just painted it flat brown to begin with. You can, of course, do it without glazing medium. You could do it with a bit of water instead. The glazing medium to me just gives me a bit more control, but it really works very, very similarly. Just make sure you wait on it to dry between your glazing layers, right? So this is our finished product. You can see there's quite a bit of depth in it. We've got a nice amount of underlayers and tones, and it has a good texture and dimensionality. So I hope that that helps. Good luck.